for having me. I am looking forward to all the feedbacks and questions that you might have. This paper has been like there forever, and now I'm hoping to get it out soon enough. So I'm gonna share my screen and then we can talk about it. If is the screen visible? Okay.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, perfect. So how do I adjust this? So the paper, it's been the attempt of this paper is to provide sort of like a roadmap for agency. By agency, I mean the ability to perform a speech act in a speech act context. I'll in a little bit I'll explain what is a speech act, how I understand it is. And the my aim is to talk about agency while also not ruling out the possibility of agency on the parts of the silenced or the powerless. So I'm looking for an account of agency where we can talk about oppression, silencing, and powerlessness without saying that the powerless are always agencyless subjects. And for that, the structure of paper is such that first I draw on Austin's model of speech act, talking about what speech act is and how speech act is sort of taken up by feminist philosophers of language such as Hornsby and Langton. And they talk about speech act in terms of communicative speech act and then communicative silencing. Then I go on to talk about how, when they talk about silencing, they talk about silencing in terms of powerlessness. And then when they talk about speech, communicative speech act, they talk about speech act in terms of power. So it's like they're saying is that um, when you perform a speech act, you have power, and when you lack the ability to perform a speech act, you should be considered powerless. The problem here is that the kind of framework of power they are working with, it seems like it only captures one aspect of power, which is like how power then can be a tool for domination and control that comes under the framework of power over defined by many people such as Amy Allen, Mary Follett, um, which is I kind of feel find problematic. So then I go on looking for resources in pragmatist philosophy and then see if there is a framework of power which I can use to then say like see how power is sort of like more dynamic. It exists on multiple axes rather than single axis. And when we are developing an account of agency, that's the kind of account of power and framework of power we require. So I'm guessing that we might be familiar with the idea of speech act and illocutionary speech act. If not, I just simply start with a small summary. So, the idea of speech act follows from J.L. Austin. Austin's theory was that when we use language, we perform different kinds of acts. So, and then he explained three categories of speech acts that we perform. One was locutionary acts that we simply utter a meaningful sentence that has like sort of a sense and reference. And then comes the illocutionary acts, which are performed in using language. So let's say I'm ordering someone to fetch me a glass of water. When I utter that sentence, I have performed the act of ordering. Simply when I say to someone that, hey, I promise I'll show up tomorrow, same thing is happening that I'm making a promise and performing the act of promising. And the third one is perlocutionary acts of threatening, frightening, all of that. That is sort of an impact of illocutionary act that follows from the that follows, and that is called the perlocutionary act. In this paper and in general, I'm more concerned with the illocutionary speech acts, such as ordering, promising, questioning, refusing. Um, the idea about illocutionary act is that it should be performed or it is performed only when we have certain felicity conditions met. So, for let's say I want to order, depending on what kind of order I'm making, there should be certain felicity conditions that has been satisfied. For example, if I'm the leader of a community or if I'm the principal of a college, I should be in authority to make an order about closing off the building, shutting down the building, closing off the classes, canceling classes. I should be in an authoritative position. if I'm saying in a different social context, if I'm standing at an altar and saying I do, I should not already be married. I should not be faking I do, and I should be genuinely willing to marry the person that I'm intending to marry. So there are felicity conditions that needs to be met for us to be able to perform the illocutionary act. Hornsby and Langton, who are two feminist philosophers, take Austin's model and then say that if speech is an action, which they are again referring to illocutionary acts, then silencing is a failure to perform an illocutionary speech act. So, whenever there is a systemic barrier or systemic failure in performing a speech act, it constitutes silencing. So, let's say when a woman says no to an offender, and then the man who is perpetrator does not take her no to mean no, and they go on, they go ahead and rape the woman. In this case, the woman is being silenced. Why? Because her act does not get performed. Why? Because in this case, illocutionary act also requires that uptake is secured. So when I say I order you to fetch me a glass of water, you should understand what I've said. And that's how we secure uptake. So securing uptake happens when the hearer understand what the speaker is trying to say. And in this case, in the case of illocutionary silencing, what happens is that the uptake goes missing. The hearer sort of fails to understand what the speaker is trying to say, though they don't take their no as no. Why does this happen? So Hornsby and Langton explains it by borrowing this idea of a power, and then they say that, well, the woman is failing because she doesn't have authority to perform the act, or the man does not recognize that the woman has authority to perform the act. According to them, it could be due to wide consumption of pornography that objectifies women. So, because pornography sees women a certain way, and people who accept those framework of pornography will never take a woman, or at least they do not take a woman to be saying no in that situation, in that particular case. And that is happening. Why? Because women then do not have social power, and men have social power over women. So, like I mentioned in the beginning already, that for them, because speech is an ability to perform an act and silencing is a failure to perform an act, they see performance of a speech act as the power of the speaker. So, their saying is that when the speaker has social power, they also hold the ability to perform the speech act. And the speaker lacks sort of social power, they also lack the ability to perform a speech act. So, in the case of the woman who fails to perform a speech act, where we are saying she might, she fails to secure the uptake because she lacks authority, and that lack of authority, in some sense, follows for her being powerless in relation to the man. So, because she's powerless, she does not have the ability to perform the act, and her act fails, and therefore she is silenced. So from here, what I understand is that now that if we want to talk about agency in Hornsby and Langton's framework, what becomes is that as long as you lack the power, social power to perform the speech act, you also lack the ability to perform the speech act. So this means that lack of power then translates into lack of agency. And when you have power, you seem to have agency. So a silenced person is considered to be disempowered because they are failing to perform the act, and therefore a silenced person might lack agency. I find this problematic for many reasons, but I do also think that their account of speech and power sort of has some strong points that can help us develop an account of agency that they themselves don't focus on developing. However, the approach of and the framework of about power that they have is sort of, I find it problematic. So I've given this there an example how the people who are considered powerful might have more ability to perform the speech act, or they get to perform more speech acts than the powerless, is to consider this example of, this is Langton's example actually, when she says that when a slave may say to his master, "Is there anything to eat?" and the utterance may have a force of ordering. Namely, when they are using this sentence, they are performing the act of ordering. However, when the master says to the slave, sorry, when a slave says to the master, "Is there anything to eat?" and the utterance will have the force of entreating, namely, um, being polite, you cannot order, so you have to beg. However, when the master say to slave, "Is there anything to eat?" the utterance has the force of ordering. So the master can advise, master can suggest, master can order. However, the slave's ability is limited only to entreating, to begging. This is because, according to Langton and Hornsby, the slave lacks the kind of social power and therefore authority required for the slave to perform the act of ordering. And once the act of ordering is performed, what the master is doing, the master is demonstrating their social and political power, the political power that they have over the slave. This is the kind of power pornography has over women. So, because pornography is so widespread and it objectifies women in such a diverse way, in such a pervasive way, that then it holds kind of power on women. When women say no, it means it might mean nothing. Just the no doesn't count. So the idea is that when the slave is silenced and their act fails, do not get to do what they want to do with their speech. They don't get to perform the speech act. They are not heard. They're silenced. They're disempowered. So from here, I draw that a person can be said to have linguistic agency if they have power, and lack of power means lack of linguistic agency, at least in Hornsby and Langton's framework. Like I said, I sort of like see problems with their theory, but I also see the strength. That one thing is to keep in mind that one of the strength that they have, their their framework has, is that when we examine linguistic agency through the lens of power, we understand how our speech and the idea of power has like profound political implications that reflect in different social dynamics. And we get to see how power sort of embedded in within linguistic institutions. So when we get to use language from a certain social position, our words tend to mean more. As a master, if I'm ordering, I get to perform the act of ordering, suggesting, advising, and many more. However, in my social position as a slave, I do not have those rights. So the power seems to be embedded in the linguistic institutions. The second strength that I see in their work is that their framework sort of enables and urges us to recognize that the comprehensive understanding of speech act necessitates an example of relationship between the power relationship between the speaker and the hearer, and the power dynamics that they might share. So it seems that when we are concerned with speech act, the social context, the social positioning becomes really important, and the social relation that the speaker and the hearer are sort of like embedded in also makes a big difference. Having said this, I think their framework has a few issues built in that. First one that I'm going to take on is that the analysis is very single axis. They provide a very single axis comprehension of power, where power is seen as a tool of domination and control. So the way they discuss power is how pornography has power over women, how master has power over slave, right? So when we think about power and agency from their framework, is that power is used to dominate, power is used for controlling. However, it seems like a very narrow focus, because to me it doesn't seem like power can be just static, or it might just flow in one direction. Doesn't seem to be that doesn't seem to be the case. And if we adopt their framework of power, then it feels like the powerless does not have any way to acquire agency. Because if you are saying that in relation to men, women do not have power, then it simply becomes that, oh, women are powerless. I sort of do not resonate with that kind of understanding. Yes, women who are victims do fail to perform their actions, but it seems that we need to find a way where we can say that failing to perform an action does not mean lack of agency. And this is the reason that I want to look for different approaches to power that can then enable us to see how agency can be preserved for the powerless as well. Um, Before that, I want to discuss a little bit how what the framework that they have. So I said that um, Hornsby and Langton seem to be dealing with the idea of power as in terms of domination and control. And so I thought that it seems that they are following this domination understanding of power, where the relation of power is overly simplified. So what is happening is that they are seeing power as in relation to the speaker and the hearer, and then the speaker seem to be in power position and the hearer seem to be lacking the power, or vice versa. So it seems like it's very one dimensional, it's very one way of flow of power, but it does not, they do not capture power in different relations. So the problem here is that although they are seeing that speaker and hearer are in relationship with each other and they sort of share a power relation, but they fail to see that this the relation that they're talking about is not like dyadic. It's not only simply between the speaker and the hearer, but where the speaker and the hearer come from, their social situation, that they themselves said that when we are concerned about speech and power, we need to look into social relationships. But the kind of social relationship they are looking at is seem to be very dyadic. And I think that when we are looking at power, we need to see not dyadic, but a much bigger web of relationships that the speaker and the hearer tend to come from. And this is sort of missing. So in what follows, I'll try to go on with the idea of power with, which is Follett's idea, and then say how the problems that we are sort of seeing in Hornsby and Langton's account can be uh, resolved through the idea of power with. So for the idea of power with, I go looking for the idea of framework of power in pragmatist philosophy by Mary Parker Follett. Follett was a American pragmatist philosopher, and they came up with the idea of power with, where power is perceived not as domination or control, which is coercive, but power is something that is jointly developed. It's not coercing, and power is seen as emphasizing empowerment. So for them, power lies or rooted in the recognition that the world is dynamic and not static, and it gets created in coherence and mutual creation. So their idea is that power lies in the society, in relationships. And as the relationship changes, the understanding of power also sort of changes. So power cannot be understood as something that is static, that is given, but given which relationship is in focus, we can only understand power in terms of focusing on the relationship. um the idea of power with that they present also presents like an ontology of relations. So the ontology of relations simply means that power lies in interconnectedness between, maybe between two people, between the person and the organization, the person and the community. So it's always evolving. And depending on the relationship, the very understanding of power, who can be taken to be powerful or powerless, is also evolving. So what she's saying is that when we are concerned with power, what we need to look at is the relationship. which relationship is at the center, and what kind of power, what kind of understanding of power is evolving when we are looking at the relationship. So her saying is, relationship at the heart of everything. Every choice we make, uh, it affects everyone around us. So for them, for then Follett, is power lies in relations, and it's non-coercive, it's non-dominating. For her, power over or dominating framework of power is pseudo power, and the only real power is the empowerment. Their idea is also, the idea of power with also involves a very unique idea of sort of individuality. So according to Follett, even though we are concerned with powerful and powerlessness, and we are dealing with the idea of power with, we are always concerned with individuals. When we are looking at individuals at powerful or powerless, we're always looking at the individuals in their relationships. So at this point, if we remember Hornsby and Langton, they are also talking about relationships, but their relationship is very dyadic. Their relationship is between speaker and the hearer. For Follett, this kind of relationship is not dyadic, but it's infinite. So maybe we are talking about one individual, but that individual shares many relations with many other people, and each relation sort of adds to their evolve, that they're evolving in the society, their empowerment, them working together, them um, being in a coherence together. So for her, the individual whose power status we are concerned with is part of a broader social process that continually extend beyond them and impact them. So even when we are concerned with the individuals are never taken out of their social situations, those social relations. But then even when you are talking about the progression of the individual, this has to happen within the society, within their relationships, within the multiple relationships that they are part of. And this is what I take to be the main key here, that when we are thinking about agency, we are thinking about how to have power for the powerless. And if we centralize the idea of relations when concerned with agency, then we don't have to worry about if an individual has power or not. What we need to worry about is that if the individual has power in relation to another individual, or in relation to the rest of the world, or in relation to maybe the community. So at this point, if we think about what an account of agency should look like, I think that an account of agency must include the idea of relationships. So when we are thinking about um, um, agency, we should think about how an agent can be powerful in relation to uh, one person, and can be powerless in relation to another person. Or it can an agent can be powerful in relation to, maybe a woman can be powerless in relation to the man, but she is powerful in her role as a mother, as a leader, as a teacher, as a community leader. And this gets clarified only when we think about agency in terms of relationships. So what I'm trying to say is that we need a more relational idea of agency as well as power. So, and if we apply this idea to the speech act perspective, we can say that when we are concerned with agency in the speech act context, the focus should not be so much on the speaker and the hearer as individuals, but they are individuals who are nodes in multiple relations. So even like I said, even if a woman is taken to be agency less in relation to a man, she might have agency in relation to her community. She might have agency in relation to her broader community, as in like the society, or in relation to men who want to see her empowered. And this is what we need for a proper account of agency that does not necessarily reduce women to agency-less subjects simply when they're silenced. Another thing I want to add is that when we are thinking about, so this is we are thinking about how women can have agency in general. But then what about silenced women, women who are failing to perform the actions and they are silenced? I think for that, what we need to do is think about how the failure should be understood as assertion. So when a woman is saying no, even though she's failing to perform the act, there was an attempt. There was some sort of resistance on the part of the woman. And that's what we need to, that's what needs to be captured when we are thinking about agency and power. So in sense that a no should not simply be a failure, but a no can be seen as a resistance against the force. And this does not get captured when, if we think simply about power as domination and control, but if we think about power as power with, where the relations are kept in the center and then the power is evaluated on the basis of the relation. So then what happens is that when a woman is silenced, the larger community can come together and try to integrate the woman into saying that, well, they still exercised agency. Why? Because they resisted against the powerful force. And I think this kind of integration is really important when we are looking into developing an account of agency, which is for the powerful as well as the powerless. So I think I'll end with this, that for a comprehensive account of agency, we must capture victimization practices, silencings. However, we should also not rule out agency. And for us to not rule out agency, we need an account of power that is more relational, that thinks about power in terms of empowerment, not simply domination and control. And I think for that, of course, developing such an account requires much more research into what agency would look like. But I think this relational understanding of power will provide the kind of foundation we are looking for, where we trying to understand agency from the point of view of the powerful as well as the powerless. Thank you, everyone. I hope I did not take too much time.
Thank you, Ritu. You are well within time. Thanks a lot for that. The floor is open for questions. I see one hand up. Krishna, you want to go?
Sure. Sorry, my throat is a bit sore.
It's correct.
Yeah. So, my question is, now this kind of relational model that it's interesting, very interesting. And but if there is somebody who is a skeptic of this relational kind of model, because it seems that even if a person has different kind of a cooperative, you're talking, I mean, if I understand you correctly, that there is different levels of cooperation that happen across people, and therefore it's not necessarily a master-slave relationship. But what about people who would say that cooperation doesn't necessarily imply that there isn't a master-slave equation? And then I mean, there's one extreme example, which is like the Marxist example, which is that cooperation is always a master slave and so on. Even if you don't go that way, then there are people who say that even in specific context between two people, depending upon what the task is, even though two people may be cooperating and people may have different relations with different people, depending upon the task, one is cooperating rather out of fear or maybe out of certain structural reasons, race, caste, or whatever. And so the reason for cooperation could mean that they are, it's falling back on the kind of dyadic relation that you seem to be resisting. I mean, my question is, it seems that the multiple, the relational model that you have can be accommodated within the dyadic model. Do you have anything to say to that?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not opposed to the dyadic relationship, but what I'm saying is like when we rely too much on the dyadic relationship, what we miss to see is that power is like much more. It's much more embedded in like it's more horizontal than vertical. If you know what I mean, it's like it's much more embedded in different sections of the society among different people. So it's not very dyadic. So when you're seeking cooperation, and if it's so, let's say we're talking about like a relationship between a man and a woman. When the woman says no, the man is just gonna say like, oh, I don't care what you say. However, so there's definitely going to be the failure, but perception of that failure can be changed when the larger community comes together to integrate the woman within the society, and then seeing them as like they're, like I said, they're like failure as resistance. So if definitely there can be cooperation if two people understand power not simply as like, oh well, I get to dominate, but if there is kind of if they see there is kind of like interdependency. The kind of relational framework I'm talking about is also involved interdependency, integration of the powerless within the system. Then it can totally work. So let's say for the master slave, yes, it's very extreme example, but there is also the master is only powerful in relation to the slave. So there is also kind of interdependency. And if we capture that more, and if we focus more on that, it seems like it might just work, and it will work. So what I'm saying is like when we replace this like power with framework with the power over framework with the power with framework, it seems like there is a way to have more integration of the powerless, where it shouldn't be like a vertical like power flows from like top down, but it's more horizontal, like power is like embedded in different relations, and integration should happen on the basis of that. I think you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, I have a clarificatory question.
Yeah,
So, do
of
you
course.
think that there can be different systems or cultures where there are different kinds of power with relations, and one system with power with is generally more unfair than the other? I mean, is it possible for no? But what I'm trying to ask is whether power with necessarily has to lead to empowerment in the right way, because I
Mhm.
think you were also talking about empowerment.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, could I have a system where structural reasons, maybe religious or cultural and so on, so on, where power there is power with, but it just is unfair, and so it may empowerment may not happen.
Mhm. Yeah, I think power over will always be there. You know, you can never get rid of like this master slave relationship. The master slave relationship in modern time is just like us working under a manager, and manager being that I'm the boss, you do what I say. So even that there is power over. But what I'm like saying that yes, there's going to be power over, but what do we need as like as a society, as an egalitarian society, is power with. So we should not simply say that, oh, when there is power there is domination, but there should be an effort for empowerment, and that's what the real power will look like. So it's what I'm appealing to is that to see power in terms of like empowerment, like you said, and integration. And it like puts the onus on the bigger community, not just when we kind of look away from the dyadic relationship of the boss and the employee. There are also like the community that can come into the picture, and then
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, I think you're right. I'm just worried that the larger community may come into the picture and may not necessarily make it more egalitarian, even if it makes it more power with or more relational, in the sense that given if there are certain structural aspects to the society, let's say it's patriarchal or whatever, different ways, and so even if the community comes in swoops in, as it were, to make certain things correct from the perspective of the culture, it may not necessarily work out in the way we would think of as being fair or correct. Yeah, that was my worry. If you have,
Yeah, I think we will have to, like, if we go through history, and then if we see like the reforms, social reforms, be it like caste in our Indian system, which is very much still there, but we still, whatever progress is there, we see the situation with women. So at some point, the community did come together. Maybe, yes, it's always going to be hit and miss. And but if we, so I think one of the problems is that we have always seen, the moment we say power, immediately we like, oh, it's used for exploitation, it's used for control, domination. We have not perceived power as a tool for empowerment, as a tool for integration. So if you're talking about structure, if we define power in this way, and then we actually then apply it does become very structural, for people to come together and use the idea of power with rather than power over. So Follett gives this example of, she's working in like how labor builds a company, and if the boss of the company understand the relationship from the point of view of power with, then there will be integration, and then it does not remain simply, so the onus, the responsibility is a lot broader than just like this boss and the employee. And that's my appeal, that we need a more power which should be included in, like, in the structure. So whenever we are thinking about power with, we should power in general shouldn't be understood as domination and control, but should be understood as empowerment as well. And once we make that like structural through social reforms, and I know it's not easy, but seems like that it could be a way to, you will always have resistance, but this is, it's more like an, what could be done, like a normative
right, right,
solution
right.
to the
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
No, I'll stop now. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
let others ask.
I hope that clarified.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Krishna. Varun?
Thanks, Ritu, for the lovely talk. And also, I was not aware of Langton's work and other things that you mentioned, so I learned a lot from it. So,
Okay.
so I want to begin with a clarificatory question, since I'm not aware of how Langton analyzes in detail. Of course, you gave a very good introduction to how they are looking into this failure of, as you mentioned, felicity of particular acts. Like, say, for example, when, and this is a question that clarificatory question that I have. I want to know in what sense Langton argues it's a lack of power that the woman, when, see, the thing is, in the scenario that you described, there is the woman and the oppressor, the perpetrator, and the woman says no, but the man still goes ahead. And so if we analyze this situation, it is her saying no. She has done a speech act, so she has executed in, I mean, I don't know whether Langton says it, but she has executed her agency in that sense, that she has said no. But it doesn't get picked up. It doesn't get acknowledged from the other side. So it is the lack of reception and acknowledging that the other person is saying no, which is we are seeing as a failure of power, is it?
Yeah. So no, actually, so Langton doesn't, she says like because the act, because there is no uptake. So because there is no understanding on the part of the hearer, the speaker does not get to perform the act. She has been criticized for that quite a lot, that like, when I say, why shouldn't I be able to, this is like my speech, why shouldn't I be able to say, because what they are saying is like, speech is communication, so it requires two parties, one to say something, another one to understand. When the understanding fails, there is no act, your act misfires. So she's saying that there are people who have said, like, there are many people like Quill Kukla, Mary Kate McGowan, who say that once the speech has happened, the speaker does perform the act, but the act fails for different reasons, for like authoritative. So there is authoritative silencing because the person lacks authority. So as a woman, I do not have the authority to say no. As a slave, I do not have the authority to order. And there is also sincerity silencing, which is like, oh well, you did say yes, did say no, but you were not sincere, so I can go ahead and do whatever because you are dressed a certain way, you came out at night with me, you're drinking with me. So, so those assumptions, when they take place, so the sincerity of the speaker gets compromised. But but,
Wow.
but for Langton, there is no speech act because
Mm.
because the felicity condition fails. So there is no uptake, so there is no speech act. And that's where the main problem lies for her then.
Yeah, I'm very surprised by this theory. I mean, like, as I was trying to think, where is the failure here? Because, like, she has said no, she has executed I mean, according to me, at least the act.
Yeah.
But it is so basically. Then another problem for Langton, a much larger problem for Langton, also arises of belief conditions. Like, say, for example, I may tell you that it is raining right now here. No, just because you don't believe it, my act hasn't got executed at all, is it?
Mhm.
Whoa.
So
Very like I don't know. I mean, like I find this her Langton's theory very. I mean, like obviously shortcoming.
yeah. Yeah, there's very obvious shortcomings. Like, so on one side, because she creates agency, at least I see it equating agency and power. And then she goes on saying that how pornography undermines agency of the woman. And I'm like, if she never had agency, if she's always considered powerless, and then if she's powerless, there's no agency. So as a powerless person who does not have agency, how do we even talk about agency? How do we
Mm,
talk about something that was never there? So
mm,
Langton has been criticized a lot over like her approach to silencing and communicative speech act. And people have
mhm,
more broadly have argued that agency is not something that can be like passed over. So because I made an attempt to perform something, it means I did have the ability to do it. It just did not get executed because it
mhm,
needed two people. So there's also new ideas of illocutionary frustrations. So the
mhm,
act did fail, it got frustrated because this hearer did not do their part, whereas
mhm,
the speaker did. So like
mhm,
people are, I'm concerned with this power aspect because um this whole agency aspect is really important because I'm thinking of agency from the part of the from the point of view of the victim. So
mhm,
when victims are morally harmed, one of the things comes that like their autonomy gets violated, their agency gets compromised. But
mhm,
then there is no, at least in speech ed context, there are not much talks about what do we need to do then, like what can be done. So I think I did not present the second half of the paper. In the second half of the paper, I'm drawing on the idea of everyday resistance, where marginalized and oppressed sort of like perform resistance through foot dragging, or just not going to work, or just like nothing big, just like small everyday resistance. And why can't then the saying no can be conceptualized as resistance in that sense? So there is agency because there is resistance. The resistance does not get taken up by the hearer. So
mhm.
yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
So, huh,
dramatic.
so okay. The larger question that I wanted to ask. I mean, thanks for this clarification of it. Like, at least I know what Langton is not doing. Uh, so like say we revise Langton's version, like say probably our version. Our version is that Langton is wrong anyways. The oppressed has just by acting has acted and has agency. Now it's just that since it didn't get recognized, there are other power relations happening, power aspects involved as well. The other person has more power over me, even though I executed agency, it didn't work out. So I did the speech act, but it didn't get accepted on the other side because that person has more power over me.
Mhm.
Now, even if we work with this sympathetic reading of the scenario of speech act and all of those things, uh, one thing I think your argument um, can do now And see, the thing is, what you argue is that, yeah, power is a much more embedded, much more distributed, much more multifaceted. Like, say, the power that I have with you is very different from the power that I have with, like, say, my sister or my friend or whatever, different sets of power. So one person is not like absolutely powerful in with everyone. They all have different equations and different hierarchies and all of those things. So given all of those things, and that is what you try to establish, I think, in the first half of the paper. What did not clarify for me is that, like, okay, having understood this multifaceted dimensional aspect of power, now if we go back to now to the Speech Act, the how does it solve the larger problem that I started out, that we started out with?
Yeah. So when we think about Speech Act, so what happens is that then one, we do not get to say that the speaker is the powerful or powerless. Like there is no absolute picture of power of the speaker and the hearer. So let's say if we say the man has power, in that particular situation, yes, we may say like in some sense there is power, but that because the power is distributed, one, the woman does not become simply agency less, and then because there is more power, what then the question comes, what can be done to improve the situation? So that's why I say power over is always going to be there, but when we have power with, it seems like then we have like a much better understanding of how power works. And then another understanding that is coming in is to like to use that kind of power to towards like social reform and towards changing the situation of the silenced, which Hornsby and Langton do not provide at all, or anybody else for that matter is not going that road. So it seems like this particular framework will give like a transformative picture of power as well as silenced. Well, of course, like social reform is a very difficult thing, almost impossible to come by with a theory, but seems like there is potential in this framework to at least start talking about it, what can be done. So like generally the answer to rape situation or sexual violence is like, do not go to the dark alley, do not go out in the evening, and that's just because, oh, the perpetrator has more power. Why can't society be okay, let's make it more safer, maybe, I don't know, more people out there, make it more safer, right? That's what I mean, that's what I'm thinking when I'm thinking about like how power with, when I'm thinking like the community needs to like involve in more, integrate the powerless more. And it goes in all aspects, like even in the caste system, if let's say the higher caste, whichever whoever is the higher caste, if they can come together and then uplift or like give the space for the powerless to at least perform the Speech Act, what happens then, the norms get created that it's not a binary of like power and powerless, it's much more mixed, and from there we can start. So that's what I was thinking, that this kind of framework at least has the potential to do, and that's why
Yeah,
it's needed
interesting.
work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ritu. Yeah.
Of course. Thanks for the question. It was really interesting.
Yeah, Jyoti, please go on.
Yeah, hi.
Hello,
So
Jyoti.
actually, yeah, thanks for the lovely talk. So actually, I'm trying to understand this whole conversation in terms of like in Rinda Fricker's testimonial injustice, and so I'm thinking like I'm trying to what I'm trying to do is trying to understand like how can power with be more integrated, and I'm trying to think of a situation where there is someone whose social identity tracks her in almost all social spheres, like suppose a black woman. So could it be the case that she doesn't even get to perform the Speech Act, depriving her of uh, her agency because she thinks she does not have power, uh, because her personal identity tracks her in all social spheres. So yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think through. Uh,
Yeah. No, I think that's really so this will be a case of testimonial injustice because they would not have the credibility to say their words won't be taken like seriously because they are a person of color. And so one, they're a woman, and then they're a person of color, right?
Yeah,
So
yes.
power with could could help by, again, it's like what are we, so the broader picture, what are we looking at? We are looking at empowerment of the marginalized. It can include people like women from marginalized situations, women, people of color, person of color. So then power with, I think power with can help is by creating, that's when again the role of like the broader community comes in. It's like she is a person of color, and but also there are like other people of color who might be empowered already, and then it becomes their responsibility to integrate this person in the broader community, not to like push them out but then pull them in. And it's is as easy as giving like the space for them to talk. Like the social reform, for the social reform to happen, I feel conversation is the first thing that we need to like start with. So like my thesis here is marital rape. And I every time, so I recently came across, not recently, just yesterday I came across the case of like 14 men are on trial for raping an unconscious married woman, and the rapists were invited by her husband, and this is in
I've,
France.
I've
So
seen that case as
now,
well.
yeah, right. So
Yeah.
now it's like, where is this between the victim and the perpetrator? No, it's also the broader society. We need to talk more about marital rape. It's not a taboo subject. It happens way more than we like to acknowledge it. And so then once we talk, when we give that space to the victims to come out and talk, that's when the reform starts. And that's what power with is to integrate the powerless. So in case this person of
And
color, if they have space, they might just speak up, they might just perform the action. So creating the space is important, that I think can happen due to power with
thank you so much.
first.
Hi, Ritu. I had a sort of question, clarification. If I understood you right, also mainly from your responses to the other questions, would it be would I be right in understanding you as saying that while there are various reasons for such acts of injustice and violence, including rape or racist violence or caste violence, maybe perhaps part of the reason is our misunderstanding of the concept of power, and hence what should a concept of power be such that it allows for avoidance of such violent acts, for example, right? So in that sense, is your project not just descriptive in terms of how power operates in society right now, which it might be partly, but also what should a concept of power be such that it helps us address this situation? Uh, Again, I mean, at least, I mean, I think more from your responses to the question, this is the impression I got, that it is a normative project in terms of conceptual. So it's not just conceptual analysis, but what we want the concept to be. So I wonder if, I mean, going by the recent trend, especially in analytic philosophy, and I'm not very familiar with it, though I've just heard of it. I'm familiar. Would it be helpful if you were to present and situate your project as one of conceptual engineering, as it's now called? It's like not only analyzing what the concept is, but what do we want the concept to be given our other various other purposes and aims. But is that something what you have in mind? Again, so that sense it was
Yeah,
clarification.
yeah, absolutely. I think so one thing I didn't want to do is like make big claims in this paper, because I'm also, what I'm doing is like bringing two very different fields together. So I wanted to set the field first. So one is like feminist philosophy of language, talking about speech act, and then that literature, and then pragmatism that has not been like taken much by the feminist philosophers. So I do say in the paper that like this kind of conception of power plays a transformative role as well, not simply like descriptive of how power tend to function, but how it should function. But I do have, so there's a philosopher named Amy Allen. She talks about three different accounts of power. When we think about a feminist account of power, she's like there's power over, then power to, and then power with. So power two is like when we perform actions. So we're using our agency to do something, that is power two. And power with is like again empowerment, integration. So I was thinking that when we talk about power with, it's power two seems to be already included in that. But I also like this very term conceptual engineering is very scary for me to like say like, oh, here's the theory, this is gonna do the thing, it's gonna change the world. So I'm very wary of that, but I definitely see the potential. I think there would be like much more work to explain exactly how this kind of power over, I think Varun and Krishna both had the question of like how would it, like what would it change. And that's what it gets complicated when you're like, okay, now it comes to the application, and we know how our world is like very hierarchical. So how do we bring a community to like involve integration? So it's like I'm still like very on the abstractive level where I'm thinking about like solving a question of silencing here. But yeah, I mean, like to answer your question, yes, very very much so, that this kind of power seems to be like the normative, this is how power should be understood, and once we understand that, then our practice also changes, of course.
Thanks, Ritu. Sushruth?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I think I might have missed much of your talk, so I'm sorry if the question sort of has already been answered. But I wanted to know if you have thought about the limits of uh, your suggestions, basically. So what I mean is, uh, let's say we grant that power myth has a transformative potential, and it can get the oppressed to the table. But maybe that itself is not sufficient for any concrete action, because if a particular oppression is, is historical, then there are chances that it has been internalized by the oppressed also. So just by getting them to the table and saying that, okay, you also have power, that by itself might not actually lead to any change on. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, totally, I completely agree. I think we have used this term like giving the resources and not telling how to use the resources. So like just giving them resources not sufficient, you need to like, so this is why I say it's like integration, and also of course the nature of integration needs to be defined. What kind of integration are we talking about? Simply saying that, hey, you also have power, you should also start talking, is that sufficient? Or create the space in which they could talk. So one thing I was thinking, why I was going the way of like everyday resistance, is to say when we say the victim, oh, you simply failed to perform the act because you did not have power, instead of saying that you did resist. So then already this understanding of like, oh, you did have the agency to perform the act and you did try, that already changes the mindset of like, I'm not a victim. It's like I'm not a victim but a survivor. So definitely like bringing them just to the table is not going to be enough. But I feel like when we talk about integration, we also talk about like, then it becomes like what kind of concrete solutions or resources will work in those situations. So when it comes to concrete solution, we need to look into resources and then make those resources available. And so what I'm doing with this framework is simply saying that we need to start thinking about those resources which will actually work. So like in the cases of adaptive preferences, like you and I have discussed many times, is that, well, they adopt the preferences that are available to them. But then how do we change those preferences? That's the main question. So when it comes to reform, changing the preferences available to the victim becomes important. And I think that's when we have to see what concrete solutions can be provided. Maybe conscious raising programs could be one, maybe reach out programs could be one, maybe more conversations could be the solution here. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to concrete solutions, we can like go on and on about it.
Yeah, a quick, a related question. How do you ward off threats of victim blaming? So what I have in mind is, phenomenologically, the oppressed might feel as if they have no agency. But you would say that, look, I am offering you a different theorization where I say that, well, there are remnants of agency. So in some sense, you are being a little more, I don't know if pedantic is the right word, but you're trying to tell them, look, I know better. You have agency, it's just that you don't realize. So it sounds very similar to some kind of victim blaming, or at least calling them ignorant. And I'm sure you don't want to do that, and that's not your intention. So I was thinking if there's a way to prevent that.
Yeah. So so the victim blaming comes when I say like, hey, you didn't have the power and here I'm the one theorizing it for you, right? But what I'm saying is that when we change the very narrative, when we when we say it was not just a failure but a resistance, then I'm not saying that they were like, oh, oh, you already have had everything, but then the conversation of having and not having does not even occur in the first place. It's like you 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 push the door but it doesn't open, but you did push the door and that counts as an attempt. So what I'm thinking is that when we change the narrative that is not like, hey, you didn't have something that I'm giving to you. I'm saying that there was an attempt and and it failed, and it doesn't have to be like explained as a failure. But so change of narrative might also change this understanding of like lacking. I'm not sure if I answered that question for you, but I think
No,
I
so then you would be saying that you're actually praising them even if they feel that they have not done enough. You're saying
No,
that, well, you did.
I'm not
Yeah.
even, no, sorry. I'm not even praising them. I'm just changing the narrative of like, I'm just changing the narrative in the sense that it's not simple doing or not doing. There's also an attempt. So I'm not saying that they did not fail. I'm saying that the act was not performed and they are a victim. But that victimhood does not mean that like they're perpetual victims. It's like cases where they fail to do something, that something did not set well. So that doesn't say anything about like about like them being like perpetual or anything. What I'm trying to say is that um the narrative is such that there is no absolute sense of agency or so nobody is an agent or a victim in an absolute sense. So one can be victim, of course, and one can be agent, of course, but there is no given victim and agent picture of it. I'm not sure
All
if
right. Yeah.
that.
I think, I'll love to hear more, but yeah. Thanks.
Krishna, you had your hand up a while ago.
Yeah. I think some of the question I had was actually preempted by Shushu, but I'll try and ask the question in a slightly different way, which is that my concern, sorry about this, my concern was whether you're not giving enough focus for structural reasons Now, in terms of power with, I was also wondering what power with, some people might say, would always come or has to be placed within a structure or a historical set of circumstances which constrain how power with can move. So any kind of normative engineering that we might want to suggest will have to work with the constraints of history, as it were, or historical institutions. And so, given that there is always going to be some constraints, there is a limit. Yeah, I'm thinking there's going to be a limit to what you can do. Yeah, that's my question. Is that you can never the normative aim that you have seems to have a limit. That's one. And the second is, I feel that you're not. I mean, there's the structural context which will always constrain and place people in relations of power is always going to be there. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree that it's always going to be there, but like the idea of power with is also like power lies in interconnectedness. So it's like throughout evolving, right? So as your relations change, the power position also changes. And that's what I meant when I said like we if we can see it like structural in the sense that it's always like, oh, sometimes you're powerful, sometimes somebody else powerful. And then it's like when you're producing something together, there can be interdependence, and that's what would work the best. So I think I'm not ready to give up this idea of like interdependence, and then that's what is needed. Then, and I'm completely okay with saying like this, there will be power with, sorry, power over, there will be domination, but then there also a way to overcome that domination. So
But isn't it?
historically, yeah,
Yeah. Sorry.
no, please go ahead.
No, no. I mean, isn't it in the interest of the people who have power to ensure that the people that they're cooperating with don't have as much power? I mean, so I want to cooperate with, you know, with my neighbors for something. As long as I can get away with, kind of be a free rider or whatever, and I make sure that I tell them what to do and then they cooperate among themselves and I get away without much work. So, in the sense that what is the motivation for, I mean, there'll always be resistance to working with or having power with somebody, because there's a cost to it. Why? What would make me come out of it? Like I'm happy to be in a power over relation
Mm-hmm.
in any cooperative venture, and I actually my aim is when I get into a cooperative venture, I actually want to have power over them
Mm-hmm.
and not power with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So one way is to say is like you never have power over. It's like your power exists only because you have someone under you. One way to tackle this is to say like again, you are powerful only in relation to the workers. If they stop working, if this completely so if they resist, they strike, your power sort of goes away. Yes, there are ways to kind of like get that back, but your power does kind of gets shaken up for even for a little bit. And I was I was hearing to Mr. Tara, just like one of his interviews, he recently passed away, and he was like there was mafia was taking over his company, and he was like the mafia was beating people up because they did not want the workers to go, and Mr. Tara sort of like came and stayed in the within in the factory for like what 3 days with the workers. And that's the kind of power over that, so power with that we need is like because he understood that the company is running in relation to those two. It cannot be just the workers, it cannot be just the owner. There has to be like there is the kind of relationship. And I think when we are, you're very right that somebody can be very happy in their like ivory tower power over, I don't want to do with anything, but that also includes destruction. There's only so much power over you can have. There should be some power with. Otherwise, it will all be destruction completely. And also, it's like I said, it's a very ideal way of me looking at it, of like power over power with, that like the person who has power over has to realize that they are in power only in relation to the people who are working under them. So it's like um Siddharth was saying, like kind of conceptual engineering has to happen at a very primitive level, very level of the concepts, for us to then say like, well, there was never power over, it was always power with. You just misunderstood that kind of power because it served you
I
in
mean,
that situation.
can
Yeah,
I have one more question if
of
there's
course,
nobody
yeah.
else? Yeah. So, now now they're talking about power with. I wonder what's the extent of power with. Do you mean power with only with other agents, but it can also be power with to a certain extent nature or inanimate things and so on and so forth? Because it seems that uh, for you to sustain power with, it has to extend over many kinds of objects, not only uh, agents like ourselves. Because if it didn't, then it may not become sustainable. For example, if all of us decided to cooperate equally and with principles of equality, whatever power with and so on, and then kind of destroyed nature, then the whole ecosystem would become unsustainable, and so then it's undermining the basis of any kind of power which we can have with each other. Yeah.
Mhm. um I don't know how would that work. Why can't we be in harmony and like decide who has more, like who, this is very, this is gonna sound stupid, but who likes what kind of work? I know that will
Who
just,
likes what? Who likes?
who likes what kind of work, who likes what kind of, so like let's say we equally distribute labor, and
Yeah.
everybody does. This is very, I know, gonna
Yeah.
sound, it does sound stupid, like it's never gonna happen, but let's for a
Let's.
thought,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like let's assume that everybody knows what they're doing. Somebody is the leader, and then somebody is the worker, and everybody is working together. What will be
No,
so
but
bad?
no. I'm saying no. Everybody working together by its. My point is working. Everybody working to itself. I'm sorry, Baba. Everybody working together does not necessarily have to imply that the outcome
Mhm.
will therefore be a good one. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like a band of robbers, right? So I mean, a band of robbers could be very cooperative, but what they're doing is wrong, and so it's possible for all of us as a humanity, the whole of us, to be working together. But still, the question remains whether, even though we have certain power with relations and cooperation and so on, it's still a question whether what we are doing is necessarily good or bad. And if that question is open, and I just gave an example of how it may lead to not only a bad outcome, but ethically bad, but also maybe an outcome that's undermining itself,
Mhm.
which is the nature. All of us, you know, decide to kind of use nature or natural resource ecosystem for our own aims, indiscriminately,
Mhm.
right? So
um
then the outcome is can still be bad. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what we need to do is like, even when we decide something, right? We need to decide what are we like aiming for. There has to be like evaluations, and then, is this what we want? Is this what is going to be like? So that's why I said, like, the end of the day, the aim is egalitarian society, and what is going to work for having an egalitarian society is us thinking that we cannot have absolute power and one cannot be absolutely powerless, but like the idea of like dependency, shareability, interdependency, integration, individuality, individuals but together, like individuals only in relation to each other, those kind of ideas, when we take them into account, it seems that there's a possibility of overcoming the destructive part of power. power that only knows sort of destruction. So like for us to know if the outcome is going to be good, we need to be in this practice of evaluating it more and more. So it's even the goals cannot be static. The goals have to change according. So when we say integration, it's not like I'm into the powerful completely integrating the powerless. It's like mutual integration of like both parties coming together and probably discussing, debating, and then coming up with something that suits both. It will be difficult to come by, but it happens almost every day, right? Like even India and China go together some days. So sorry,
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
It's gonna sound stupid. Sorry.
We don't have other questions, so I may then make one sort of comment suggestion. Thank you again for the talk. I think, I had heard of something like conceptual engineering, but I was not too convinced or did not appreciate what it was. But I mean, even if the term itself is a bit scary, as you said, I think I can better appreciate with your talk as to why it's sort of useful to differentiate it from mere conceptual analysis. I think you mentioned it somewhere, but maybe it's worth clarifying, or I'd like to ask if, say, the power with and power over, would it be, again, am I right in understanding that you want to say that power with is in some sense more fundamental, and even if there are power over in individual relations, that somehow in some sense emergent from the larger network of power with?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is like what Follett says is her idea is that there is no power over. When you say power over, that's a pseudo kind of power. The real power is power with, which lies in empowerment, when like which the tool is integration, and she says interviewing and integration. There are two ways in which power with works. So two individuals working in relation to each other and then just like climbing the ladder up, and when there is integration, two conflicting parties coming together finding ways to overcome the conflict. So even if there is like, let's say, power over working, power with can be a solution, is what like Follett is sort of saying.
But if you want to call any instance of what we now call power over a pseudo power, but it is a real something. It may be a pseudo power, but what is it then a real what?
Yeah.
There are instances of alienatory silencing. There are instances of where a person, the oppressor, again, if you don't want to call it exercises power, exercises some kind of capacity to silence the other one, inflict violence. If it is pseudo power, what is it in real then? So I don't know, maybe if calling it pseudo power itself might be as opposed to say it's a instance of power over, which emerges in some sense from the larger network of power with. And understanding it that way might also help to say, to see or to explain why, even if, say, I have power over somebody else, even if two of us don't change, and if there are changes elsewhere in the network of power with, it has a bearing on my power over. Say, for example, if there is a legislation that we will just accept the woman's testimony in case of sexual assault, no questions asked. Neither is a particular man or a particular woman involved in this. So there should be no direct, the power over, just understood as a dyadic relationship, does not change. However, because there is change somewhere else in terms of the power with, it has a bearing on my or a man's power over. So then I wonder if this, idea of power over as emergent from power with might help at least accommodate this. Because again, it seems to me that just calling it pseudo power then might serve to say that that's not even an exercise of power of any sort, while it is an exercise of something, right?
Yeah. And I completely agree with you that like you can never get away with like this idea of power over. So somebody, I don't know, talk, somebody was saying like human beings by nature are hierarchical. You follow a system of hierarchy. Hierarchy does not necessarily mean problematic. It becomes problematic when when we attach power to it, and then that power, then in which way that power is exercised. So when power is exercised as power over, like mother has power over their children, but that not oppressive per se. So it's like the power over is always going to exist there. But what I'm concerned with, then that power over is sort of like exercised in a problematic way, like for domination, for marginalization, for exploitation, for controlling rights of others, you know. So if when it's exercised in that way, that's when the problem begins, and that's when power with can help. So even though I'm drawing on Follett, I'm never saying that, oh, we can do away with with power with power over.
Moreover,
I don't think that's not even realistic. What is more realistic is to say, so like, find ways to overcome that destruction that is being created due to power over, is what I'm sort of like aiming in this paper.
thanks, Ritu. Any other questions, or we are just about 1.5 hours into the meeting and we should call it a day? It's near midnight for Ritu as well, right?
Yeah, it's
That's
fine.
okay. That's fine, but
I'm up until late, and tomorrow is weekend, so it's gonna be good. I don't mind.
we don't have other questions as well, so maybe we could end it. Yeah, thanks a lot, Ritu, for a
Of course.
wonderful talk and for the discussion, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you
Have
for
a-
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Have a good weekend,
Thank you,
everyone.
Ritu.
Thank you so much. Have a great day and have a good night.
Yeah.